Nottingham ale, boys, Nottingham ale, no liquor on earth is like Nottingham ale. Nottingham ale, boys, Nottingham ale, no liquor on earth is like Nottingham ale. Nottingham ale, boys, Nottingham ale, no liquor on earth is like Nottingham ale. Nottingham ale, boys, Nottingham ale, no liquor on earth is like Nottingham ale. And it is way past all of our bedtimes because we are old. My name is Thomas Allen. Welcome to our late night BBE Live / release party for our new CD, Chicago Stories, the album. And I am here with my fabulous, fantastic, phenomenal, talented friends who will introduce themselves with all kinds of awesome rhyming words or something. I don't know. Go for it.
All right. I'm Leanne Dale Ragusa. I'm one of the directors of the BBE. I'm the resident flute player. And I'm coming to you from Bloomington, Indiana.
And I am Brandy Berry Benson, another one of the directors of the BBE. Sorry, I can't improvise rhyme for you in the moment, but I am streaming to you from Chicago, Illinois, in my own little Christmas land that I've decided to keep up until whenever it gets more sunny.
That's totally fine. Awesome. And we have special guests waiting in the wings who are about to come in. And oh my gosh, who knows who will be the first one to pop up? But I know because I'm in control here. And the first one who's going to join us is Kurt Westerberg.
What a surprise.
Yes. Yes. Kurt is one of the composers for our album, and we are so glad that he is here. And we have so many other people who are jumping in. Who is going to be next? Oh, it is Chris and her amazing tulips in their background. Thanks so much for jumping on, Chris. Chris is the secretary of our board of directors. And next up, we have Amos Gillespie, who looked like he was slightly caught off guard there, which was really exciting. Amos was with us on Friday for our normal BBE Live, and we'll get to hear some of his music today on the album. And who's up next, coming to us from Florida, where they're surviving the Gators, is Deb and Joe, and their cat, who is sitting behind. Thanks so much for joining in. Deb and Joe are longtime friends of the BBE. Then we have Joanna, who was prepared to be on screen. Joanna is the president of our BBE board, and we're so glad that she could join us again for this one. Next up, we have the amazing Heidi Houston, who is also one of the composers on our CD, and we're so happy that she could join us from Wisconsin. And finally, we have the king / treasurer / he holds the purse to the BBE, Bill Floater, who is our treasurer, for the BBE board. And this is our family for tonight. Thank you all so much for joining us. All right. So with that, guess what? We're all here to celebrate one thing, and that is the release of our Chicago Stories album. I'm going to be mostly running the slide decks and stuff like that. So Leanne, Brandy, do you guys want to talk a little bit about the album, and then we can start listening to some music?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Chicago Stories is actually something that started back in 2017, I think now at this point. And it was a project that we decided to start because we questioned, what if we had new music for period instruments or for old instruments? And what if, not just that, if we had music that was actually written about Chicagoans by Chicagoans? And so we started on this journey of working with, over the span of the next 2 years, 6 composers for about 8 to 9 months, maybe even 10 months for each of those years. And so this album, you'll see 5 of those composers represented here, is basically a culmination of all of that. All of that took place. So, Leanne, you want to jump in?
Leanne was caught off guard.
on my iPad. Yeah, keep going. You're good. You're doing well.
Okay, I'll keep going. Yeah. Anyway, so we are super pleased to have, we have Amos Gillespie, Kurt Westerberg, and Heidi Houston joining us tonight. Also featured on the album is Ronnie Cooler and Eric Malmquist. And what was really cool about this album, we have several different communities and stories that are featured from all across Chicago. Stories like the 2 Assyrian refugees finding refuge here in Chicago after fleeing a war-torn Iraq. The Swedish immigrant community represented by Kurt Westerberg's grandfather, who immigrated here from Gothenburg to Chicago, and really cool piece. He's going to share more about the structure of the piece and how that came to be. Amos Gillespie grew up with a band of Mexican brothers in Pilsen who are keeping the Latin jazz culture alive and well here in Chicago. And so he wrote 3 songs representing them, which he'll also share more about later tonight. Heidi Justin had the pleasure of interviewing 2 women of color who are leaders, high up leaders in both the non-for-profit and for-profit sectors. And so her 2 pieces actually represent their stories and their leadership triumphs and struggles. And so she'll share more about that later tonight, but we are super excited that she's also on the album as well. And then, of course, Eric Malmquist, who wrote about one of his best friend's mothers, who is an Assyrian refugee who found her home here in Chicago after fleeing Iraq, and then another friend of hers that also is here in the Lincolnwood area, who wrote a beautiful poem in Assyrian, which that's going to be shared about more later. So wide variety, so many different, and just as you would expect in a city where there are so, many diverse communities and people who make up this city, we expected nothing less from the album. And so as we go through tonight, you're going to hear a little more about behind the scenes, how this album came to be, a lot of the relationships that were forged between the composers and the community, and also between the composers and the BBE musicians. And so we're super excited you guys are joining us tonight to hear more about this album that we are excited to release in the middle of a pandemic. So
yeah, and with that, we have a little B-roll. So we were really happy during the first Chicago Stories program, of which Eric, Heidi, and Amos were a part, that there was a little behind-the-scenes production put together by Tribeca Flashpoint College, which we'll share with you in 2 parts. The first part let's share now, and then when we come back, we'll hear a little bit of Ronnie Culler's music. So this is, thanks so much to Tribeca College for putting this together for us, and this is about the first Chicago Stories we ever did. My name is Thomas Alain, and I'm officially the executive director of the Bach and Beethoven experience. I do a lot of the back-end administration. I do a lot of kind of development for the organization. Music's origin was always around events or around people. It predates history. We don't know when music really began, but from what we can kind of tell, it always was around ceremonies. So Chicago Stories is really a project focused on people in Chicago. And it can really be summed up by saying it's music about Chicagoans, written by Chicagoans, and performed by Chicagoans in Chicago. I mean, it could not be more Chicago-centric.
I'm the artistic director of the Bach and Beethoven experience. I was one of the founders of the Bach and Beethoven Ensemble, as it was previously known. We're really interested in taking classical music out of its jewel box and transforming it to be, like it was back then, a very social part of the culture, a very social part of people's lives. It also gives us the ability to really tear down those walls between performer and audience, making the audience even more so a part of the performance. Chicago Stories means to us a really important step forward artistically for our ensemble, but I think what it did for me personally was remind me why I'm a musician.
And that's the first half of that awesome piece put together by Tribeca. So first up, we have Ronnie Culler. And I didn't actually get to perform this one because it was all instrumental. I think that was all you, Brandy, and Leanne, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so just to say a few words about Ronnie Culler. So she actually couldn't join us tonight. She has a young one, has a bunch of family things going on right now, but she is here with us in spirit and in person. So Ronnie, hello to you out there in, the interwebs, wherever you are. But, I first met Ronnie, actually, she was a 3 arts artist like me. She had won the award the year before me. But what I loved about her music, and actually we taught at the Old Town School of Folk Music together, so she actually was a teacher there for a time when we overlapped. And so we, got along so well. We were friends right away, but I also had heard, some of her music, and she's very inspired by Argentino tango. And I know she's was or still is the artistic director of the Luca Pazza. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, Ronnie, but and then also, did a lot of other great works around the city. Played accordion, played violin, as you could see there, and then also is a fabulous keyboardist in addition to being a really great composer. When we approached her, she, actually lived off of the Bloomingdale Trail. And so that was her immediate first story that she wanted to write for Chicago Stories, and not just about the place, but about, how like different groups of people use the trail, commute down the trail, whether they're riding their bike, they're running, they're dancing, skipping or whatever. And so she created these little musical vignettes. But what's really cool is, and unique about this piece too, is not just the story, but the instrumentation that she uses. So she actually wrote this for recorder, traverso, cornetto, brook violin, and viola da gamba, which I don't know of any other piece out there that has this instrumentation, and you would be really far-fetched. I actually don't even know that there's another piece out there that involves the cornetto and the traverso, because historically speaking, those two instruments didn't live in the same centuries, but now we're in the 21st century. And so, instruments that were can be again. And so, what's really cool is composers can take those different palettes of sounds and make new combinations. And so this piece is a really great example of all of those things.
All right. And so we got the Bloomingdale Prelude for y'all to check out. Oops, that was just me. I forgot how cool those pieces are. Yay for Ronnie's pieces.
Hey.
We got to also mention too the Bloomingdale Trail for those of you who are out there who may be watching this and are not from Chicago. That used to be a train line, so all those train sounds that you were hearing was also like sort of paying tribute to what the Bloomingdale Trail used to be. So I wanted to throw that in there. But yeah, it is a very cool, very, very cool suite. We had a lot to play.
Yeah, and before we go on to our next composer, I just want to throw out there, hey, so our album is now live on our website. You can purchase the digital content and get it tonight. You can purchase a CD and get it in a few weeks, whenever we get those, because COVID's a little delayed on everything. And then also, I think within the next 24 hours or so, they'll be available on places like iTunes and Amazon and Spotify and other services as well. So anyway, that's what this party is about, is the album. So we're pleased to put it out there. So how about we check out our next composer, who is actually here today, and that's Amos. Hey, Amos, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, good. And I know I got to sing. If you check out what we put on the CD, we threw on Amos's 3 songs based off the Wailing Wall. Amos, why don't you tell us a little bit about these songs and like what kind of led you to select these texts and to choose the Pilsen community, which you honored with your work.
Well, it started with the instrumental piece that I wrote that centered around this Latin jazz band that I played with for 10 years, consisting of the Alvarez brothers, these 4 brothers that have been running this ensemble for over 30 years. And they were at a point in their musical lifespan where they're kind of struggling with adapting to changing times and having to kind of downsize their ensemble because it was a big band and it had become difficult to maintain that size of an ensemble and to get the kind of payment that's required to keep everybody satisfied. And so they were kind of losing their opportunities, and so it started to, I viewed it as being a lost heritage for them because that was their life. And so these songs are actually based on poems by Rosaria Castellanos, Mexican poet, she was a poet and politician and eventually an ambassador in Jerusalem, and wrote these poems based on the Western Wall in Jerusalem, which was a place where people would go, and it had a nickname, Wailing Wall, where people would go and mourn the loss of lost dwellings that were part of their heritage. So it was there was a bit of a parallel there to losing your heritage and embracing kind of that sorrow to some extent. So that's where these poems are derived from.
And one more question before if anybody else has any questions too. I'm curious, like, you're a jazz musician. You and I are saxophonists, although I'm pretty sure you're probably better than I am. Like, what were some of like the unique experiences about writing for some of the instruments? Because I'm sure before this you hadn't necessarily written for a viola da gamba, or you probably hadn't written for some of the other instruments. Like, how did that relate maybe to some of the jazz music you wrote? Were there any similarities, or what were the big differences?
Yeah, I know there seems to be a bit of a disparity, right, between being a saxophonist in a Latin jazz band and then writing these very sweet vocal pieces, And, the explanation is that I always, kind of in grad school gravitated towards developing friendships with the girls in the vocal department. I don't know what it was about going to school at Chicago College of Performing Arts, but I kind of related to the girls in the voice department. And so they became my friends, and I ended up really enjoying listening to the operas and opera scenes that they had performed. And so it got me into vocal writing. There's a bit of an explanation there for you, but in terms of like the association of instrumental writing to writing for voice, I think there's, a lot of parallels. Writing for instruments, it's very much, for me personally, you're focused on a melodic line, and that's kind of how I approach vocal writing as well, where I kind of prioritize a melodic line and then sort of fitting words to that and molding everything together.
Cool. And anything in the near future planned for you for writing for early instruments, or are we just back? Actually, you have a show coming up, don't you? A jazz show.
I'm working on that. There are some COVID restrictions that I just keep running into difficulties with, and finding rehearsal space and like finding some of my I've got all my performers were actually really enthusiastic about it, except finding a pianist has been really difficult.
Hmm.
So I'm working on putting that together and finishing all that the music for that. But other than that, I mean, I have a performance tomorrow through Northbrook Library. Is with the Lakeshore Rush Ensemble, and it's a really interesting program. You could probably find it on the Northbrook Library. It's a 3:00 live stream. And other than that, that's what I got going on.
Cool. Well, how about we do this? How about we listen to track number 3 of your 3 songs based on selected poems from The Wailing Wall, Como el Mar, and we'll enjoy that. And I think it's we're going to do it in the entirety. Yeah. So enjoy. Sedienta como el mar y como el mar ahogada de agua y solo brillona, de agua y solo brillona. Vengo desde el abismo hasta mis labios que son como una torpe tentativa de plaga. Como arena rendida, como arena rendida, llorando por la fuga de las olas, llorando por la fuga de las olas. Y mares de pañuelos blancos, de muelles desolados y naufragas, de agua solo brillona, de agua solo brillona. Mi playa es un caracol que gime, porque el viento en sus paredes furioso revienta como el mar y como el mar ahogada, como arena rendida, como arena rendida, llorando por la fuga de las olas, llorando por la fuga de las olas. Llorando por la fuga de las olas, llorando por la fuga de las olas. Llorando por la fuga de las olas, llorando por la fuga de las olas. Amos, I hope that we did that justice for you.
So you know what? I have to mention that in the instrumental piece, the title of it was Solo. And it's an expression, solo, because Jaime Alvarez, the band leader, would yell out solo to to try to get any one of us to solo, and maybe he would just yell at us and do one of these. And what happened in the end of this piece, when you heard Brandy solo, is very similar to the sound that you would get in the band, minus somebody shouting solo. It comes in, but structurally, they always would come in at the end, and that was a very similar kind of harmonic progression, which is just kind of like a 5-chord, 1 chord, 5-chord, emphasizing the 5-chord, and then 1 chord, and it worked beautifully. And I thought, Brandy, your soloing was wonderful.
Well, thank you.
We should actually go back and do an edit and just have Amos yell solo.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, solo. Go, Brandy. You got it.
So funny. Well, awesome. I love that. All right, cool. Well, thanks so much, Amos. That was a joy to get to do and to listen to as well. We're gonna jump to a B-roll really quickly. This is the second half of the Chai Stories Tribeca program, that our show that they put together. And Amos, you'll recognize the first person who pops up. So here we go.
My name is Amos Gillespie. I'm a composer and a saxophonist. I write music primarily for chamber ensembles, like contemporary classical, but I also write music for film, music theater. My compositions tend to have somewhat of a neoclassical style with a bit of jazz influence and a bit of contemporary or avant-garde influence. So that's sort of the way that I try to get people hooked. My primary focal point is kind of a European classical tradition.
My name is Heidi Jostin, and I am a composer, pianist, music director, harpist here in the city. I wrote 2 compositions for this Chicago Stories, as well as my colleagues did. My 2 stories were specifically about 2 women in the city who are in leadership positions of power. I just wanted to tell stories. I wanted to enhance a story with music. And then eventually in my undergrad, I fell into musical theater, which eventually had me fall into opera. And so I've spent a lot more time in opera since I moved to this city. Chicago Stories Project really, really changed my life and gave me a whole new perspective that I never thought I was going to get. So greatly appreciative to all of you for this.
My name is Eric Malmquist, and I'm a composer. I created 2 Assyrian songs for their first Chicago Stories concert. They are both based on the texts of local Chicagoans that are originally from Iraq and came here as refugees in the 1980s. I learned a lot about Assyrian culture and Assyrian popular music over the course of doing research for this project. So I really tried to take those 2 venerable traditions and combine them in an interesting and new way.
We always love communicating with people who want to be a part of our BBE family.
The future for BBE is extremely bright. We're on our way, we're getting our stride, and we're excited to see what more we can do to change the face of classical and early music in this community.
Look at how positive we were before coronavirus. That's so cute. All right. Well, next up, we got Kurt. Hey, Kurt. Brandy, you want to take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually had the pleasure of first meeting Kurt because I am on faculty at DePaul University. Kurt was the head of the composition department and also the assistant dean for a year or 2 before he is now retired and very much deserving of his many, many accomplishments and being able to retire. But I had originally approached Kurt and had asked him, have you ever written music for period instruments? And so, and that started off first with a duet for Brook Violin and harpsichord. And then I asked him again, hey, what would you think about writing music for the BBE for Chicago Stories? And actually, maybe there was even another composition, the Orphic Hymns.
He did the 3 Orphic hymns.
Yeah. Even before that, that was part of the humanities, the DePaul Humanities series that they have going through their department. And so the Orphic Hymns were really cool because that was for countertenor, baroque violin, and viola da gamba, and then it was even after that I had asked him, well, what would you think about composing for Chicago Stories? And he thankfully said yes. And so, and the rest is history. But Kurt, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, what was the community that inspired you most? And, I mentioned already that your grandfather had immigrated here from Jotunberg. And so tell us a little bit more about that story and how that worked into this composition, Swedes in Chicago.
Yeah, not quite as exotic as what we've been hearing, but this is the influence of the Swedish community in Chicago, which my grandparents were a part of, and in which I grew up partially as a part of, although I grew up in the suburbs. So, however, I was a part of it because we would go to Andersonville when I was young to buy food for holiday occasions, especially for Christmas. At any rate, my father's father, whose first name, believe it or not, was Thor, although they pronounced it Tor, immigrated from the west coast of Sweden. The family had a small farm south of the town of Gothenburg, and in the 1890s emigrated from that town and came straight to Chicago because he had a brother who had already emigrated and who was living here. And they went through a variety of life experiences, a variety of odd jobs, unusual jobs, working in a brickyard, working for a farm out near DeKalb, so on and so forth, before becoming interested in, of all things, the ministry, and decided to become a member of the ministry, not of the Lutheran Church, which is the state church of Sweden, but of the Swedish Methodist Church here in the States. And he attended a seminary, believe it or not, there was a Swedish Methodist seminary in Evanston. And he attended that seminary and then was assigned first to two small Swedish communities in, logical place, of course, for Swedes, in Texas. There were two small Swedish communities. One was called Decker, and I think the other was Tyler. They're both relatively near Austin. And believe it or not, they had services in Swedish, and they had a Swedish newspaper. I think there is still a Swedish newspaper published from around there, and really a Swedish cultural life in Texas. Although at that time, he was living essentially on a farm near the community. Then with 4 sons, he decided they should have a more metropolitan experience. So he moved the family back to Chicago, and for the last 20 years of his life was a pastor in Andersonville and also farther west on Irving Park for several parishes. And when I received this commission, my brother and I have an older brother, his name is Kermit, who actually had lived in Sweden for 10 years and speaks Swedish well. He's a good archivist and a linguist. And we remembered that my grandfather had published, so to speak, a typewritten autobiography of his time in Sweden and his time, of course, here as an immigrant and then as a member of the Swedish community in Chicago. So he found it, and it was written in English. He challenged himself to write it in English. He, of course, spoke English, but was much more comfortable in Swedish all of his life, really. But challenged himself to write a manuscript in English that detailed this. I had my brother translate it back to Swedish just to get the flavor of the language. And the piece itself is then organized around several vignettes from my grandfather's life. And there are quotes from that autobiography read by my brother in Swedish to go along with that, except for the very final quote, which is in English. And that's a quote that comes from the end of my grandfather's life, when he had to preach in English and Swedish, and speaks of those things. Do you want me to go further, or that probably is more than you want to hear at this point? The music along the way starts with a sense of leaving home, and then works through experiences related to working in the new land, working in Chicago, and then a train ride in Chicago that he remembers well because there were it was a train ride that came back from the Des Plaines campgrounds, taking a train from there back to Chicago. And on the train were, of course, groups of people who had been at the Des Plaines campgrounds, which was a religious meeting place. And they were singing hymns, but there were also people on the train who had not been part of the campground experience, but were having their own campground experience and were singing. They were under the influence of alcohol, and they were singing more unreligious songs, so to speak. So you get a dialogue of those things going on at one part of the piece. And then the last part incorporates several Swedish hymns. It's part of a constantly flowing musical line, so you might not recognize them, but there is a series of hymns that are either Swedish or hymns that were beloved by the Swedes. Before the end, where you hear recorder being played and sung at the same time. Supposedly when my grandfather, who died when I was 3, supposedly when he was very moved in giving sermons, he would sometimes sing from the pulpit. So that's what that refers to at the end.
Wonderful. And I think, Brandy, we're going to hear the last 2 sections.
We're going to hear, you should be hearing from where the trains start, that train diary entry. So you'll hear the viola da gamba and the harpsichord, being the train. So we're going to hear that scene of the 2 camps of people, the one singing the hymns and the other singing the body songs, and
awesome.
The group singing the hymns drowns out the body songs. And
awesome.
We do hear the recorder singing. Patrick O'Malley, who played the recorder for this, he sang into his recorder, so you'll hear that at the very end as well.
Awesome. Well, let's listen. So this is the last few sessions of Westerberg's Swedes in Chicago.
Tillsammans med många andra steg jag ombord på Chicago-tåget sent på kvällen. I den vagnen där jag åkte, eller rättare sagt stod, var en folkmassa som enligt min mening stod för 200 människor. Framme i Chicago upptäckte vi att kyrklivet där hade ändrat språklig karaktär. Det var inte längre helt svenskt utan tvåspråkigt. Gudstjänsterna på morgnarna och bönemöten i mitten på veckan hölls fortfarande på svenska. But I could give the people my best sermons in Swedish on Sunday mornings, and I did so. The response to my Swedish preaching in Austin was very good. The best I have had in any church I served. I gave the Bible in sermons and lectures, and it was much appreciated.
Yay. Sorry, I think I looked a little dazed because I was trying to figure out what to do with the computer. That was awesome. I have to say, Kurt, because I sang your Orphic hymns, obviously, as you know, and it was one of the most difficult things I've had to read rhythmically. But it's so satisfying to get to perform your music because it's just so interesting. And I hope everybody at home enjoyed hearing the train, and then, of course, as Brandy pointed out, Patrick singing there at the end. So thanks so much.
The Zoom presentation also added some rhythmic complexities that weren't really there as well. But
happens sometimes. So, all right, great. So let's head on. So unfortunately, Eric can't be here with us tonight for family reasons. But Eric was, as you noted from the Chicago Stories movie that we were showing, was one of the first three composers that we asked to join us for this adventure. Leanne or Brandy, do you guys want to talk about this? I'm happy to do so, but I don't want to hog.
Sure, I'm happy to
go for it, Leanne.
About it. So Brandy mentioned a little bit before about what his two pieces are about. He wrote two Assyrian songs that were based on Assyrian immigrants that found refuge in Rogers Park in Lincolnwood. And each song was named for the person who authored the story. The first song was Iman, and that was about the mother of Eric's friend, Inanna. And she spent almost 2 hours with Eric, sharing the story of her escape from her home, Ankawa, I think is how you say it, in northern Iraq during the 1980s. She lived as refuge in Iran and Syria, eventually coming to Chicago in the 1990s. And this song can actually be broken into two sections. There's kind of a solemn, slow opening where she recounts the dangers of escaping Iraq. Then there's a faster middle section with kind of active rhythmic patterns alluding to the anticipation of coming to the border. And then it returns to the slower tempo, but with a more uplifting sound to convey the feelings of hope and encouragement as the police welcome her to Iran. Then we have the second song, which is Minos, and that's based on a poem from the renowned Assyrian poet Minos Merari. And he originally was from Kirkuk in northern Iraq, and he arrived in the U.S. around the 1980s. And he lived in the northern suburbs of Chicago since his arrival. And Minos speaks a different dialect of Assyrian than Iman. And Thomas actually had to take lessons because in school, right, you don't have to learn how to speak Assyrian.
No, it's not one of the languages. No.
It's not one of the languages. You have like 6 other languages, but you don't have to learn Assyrian. And so because of this new dialect, Eric was eager to learn more about the Assyrian alphabet. And then he also drew inspiration specifically for this piece from Assyrian pop artists like Linda George, who's considered to be the Beyonce of the Assyrians. Thomas, did you want to say anything about performing his pieces? Because you were the one that actually...
Sure, I'm happy to. Yeah, this was a lot of fun to do. I had to listen to Assyrian music to learn a little bit about ornamentation in like a very short amount of time. So I did give it my Boy Scout best. Iman's daughter, I went and took Assyrian lessons with her so that way I could, give a good stab at the pronunciation. And fun fact, I've gotten paid more to sing in Assyrian than I have ever gotten paid to sing in French. So I don't know what to say about that one, but I think, one personal note on this one, which I mentioned when we did our Early Music America trivia night this past Thursday. Eric has written for me several times, and they've always been very intimate songs for specific people and for specific occasions, which is a lot, which is really what Chicago Stories is based upon. And we all had the privilege of premiering this piece along with Heidi and Amos's at the Green Mill. And I can peg this as one of the top musical experiences of my life, because sitting in the front row with Eric was Iman and her daughter, and it was also one of, as everything I have to sing by Eric, because they're so intimate, one of the most difficult things of my life, because as it starts and I'm literally singing her words back to her about her escape, and I start hearing her and her daughter sobbing, it is the most difficult thing to keep yourself emotionally together and to give your best performance. It was a really intense experience, but I absolutely love these pieces, and I've taken them elsewhere to sing them as well. So I'll just leave it at that. And if y'all don't mind, let's jump right in. We're going to hear an excerpt from the second one, Ninos, so you get to hear my excellent Assyrian accent. But this is a beautiful story, a beautiful poem. The translation roughly describes the desire for the Assyrian people to, again, have a homeland. And it talks about breaking free of bonds and attaining that freedom. So this is number 2, Ninos. All right. Yay, Eric.
One other thing to mention is he actually, so the violin part was in scordatura. So instead of being tuned in the traditional G, D, A, E, my bottom two strings are actually both raised by a whole step, so that my strings were A, E, A, E. So, which is very resonant on the violin. And so that was another feature that Eric explored, was this this tradition of scordatura tuning. So anyway, that was another cool thing in that piece as well.
All right, and we have one more composer who has been waiting patiently, ever so patiently, to talk about her pieces, and that's Heidi. Heidi, hey, Brandy, so you and Leanne got to, I didn't get to sing it because Alex got to sing it. I was very upset and very, very jealous, but that's okay. But since y'all two were in on these pieces, do you guys want to grill Heidi for her social security number and stuff?
Oh yeah, sure.
Well, I'll give it to you. I have no money.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, I'll say just a few words. I'll hand it over to Leanne. This was really cool. I mean, Heidi, actually was, someone that we kind of in a lot of ways kind of cold called for this project. We found her and listened to some of her stuff and thought she seems really cool, and then met her and really thought she was cool. She's just such a lovely person to work with. Just as we were chatting, I mean, she was just so thrilled for just the opportunity to get to write for other different kinds of instruments that she hadn't, period instruments is not something, I mean, I think each composer who was a part of this project, and many composers can attest to the fact that it's not an opportunity you get. Most composers don't ever get the opportunity, quite frankly, but we're changing that, for new music to enter in with and be a part of the new music for period instruments to be kind of part of the mainstream. But I was just really what I really loved about working with Heidi is just how, and everybody was collaborative for sure, but she really wanted to, there was just another level of just vulnerability and just being personal in her music that, really came across, especially as we were doing the incubators and the sketch rehearsals and things like that. And so, I'll kick it over to Leanne, if she can say a few more words too as well.
Sure. Before I pass it to Heidi for her to explain about all of her music, I just want to say I really enjoyed Yes, because it really was, it wasn't a typical piece, right? So she kind of put to music what a meeting is like. And I'm sure we've all sat through so many meetings before and we're like, oh my gosh, this person is really annoying, or this person won't shut up, or whatever. And she did it all, and she put it in music, and we had Alex sang, and she actually conducted us, and so she was in charge of the meeting, and she would tell us when we could talk or interact, and it was fun. It was a lot different. We actually got to be kind of dramatic and kind of act, which is what we do a lot of, but in this way it was a little bit different, and we actually got to tune. And how many times do we actually get to tune
in the middle of a piece?
It didn't take, sometimes like orchestras tune and it's like 20 minutes. Luckily this was like a quick tune, but it was nice to have that in the piece. But Heidi, did you want to tell us about, since you're the composer?
Sure. I'm happy to give a little insight into this. So first of all, it hit me like a ton of bricks watching that B-roll footage on how young we look and how long ago 4 years ago was. And thinking through this piece, it's important to give a little bit of context in that, I was commissioned for this piece for BBE, the basically full calendar year of 2017. And what I really wanted to tell for a Chicago story, I'm not from Chicago, I'm from the Northwoods of Wisconsin in a super small town. I wanted to meet leaders, especially female leaders and female leaders of color who are really, really exceeding in their particular areas that they are leading in. 2017 was a year that we assumed a whole new leadership in America. And there's been a lot that's happened since 2017. And while I never, ever want to speak for these women, I learned so much from them on how they were successful leaders in their particular areas. One was a leader of a community health network. Another one was a leader in a neighborhood. She was a community organizer. And there were two huge things that stuck out to me that really inspired both of these incredibly contrasting pieces. Starting with Yes, I'll start with that one to start with. Both of them made it very, very clear that their job as the head, as the leader of this, was to surround themselves with the smartest people that they could, who are going to all have better ideas than she is going to have. But her job is to pick out the best idea and to go forward with that. And that kind of humility, while also being so confident and being able to hear and know that this is exactly the right answer, this is how we're going to move forward, this is how we're going to move forward successfully, was unbelievably inspiring to me, especially seeing on a global scale, or, you know, a national scale at least, somebody who took credit for everything. Both of these women said, my team is the best that I have. And they are the people that are going to make sure that we go forward. And so Yes was a very, really fun and rewarding experience on how to create a wordless opera of what happens in a meeting. And so like Leanne had said, Alex, as the vocalist, was in there listening to all of these ideas come from the different instruments and deciding that's the one we're going with. And that musical material created the next phrase, the next section of music that we were going to hear on how successful this is. At some point in this meeting, though, everybody hits a stall, and it's a 12-tone chord that clearly we're not making it. And at that point, the leader's got to recalibrate, coach on where it's going, and then that's where they retune. That was something that was really important to me, to just be able to be like, okay, we just got to reset. We got to take a step back, get ourselves where we need to go, and then move forward. It's hard for me to talk about reach in a contemporary, right now, 2021 sense. When thinking of reach, I didn't want to, how do I say this? Going forward with reach is all about the opportunity that you're, like, especially as a female, that you're constantly hitting the ceiling. It's in it, the musical ideas themselves are that it's your typical Baroque A format, where on the second time you hear it, the instrumentalists are given the opportunity to embellish if they'd like to, but pretty typically with this, it's dissonant. It's got this constant upward motion that never quite gets there, because there still is quite a disparity when you are female, when you are a person of color. Anybody that is an other outside of your typical cis hetero white male, we still have a lot of work to do. And I feel like without getting super political, anything over the past 4 years has showed us we have so much work to do. And in listening to and amplifying the voices of people in those communities to really reach true equity, true justice, all of that type of just true equality. And so with reach, it's that idea that we're working so hard to get there. We're constantly just trying to push forward, but we're still not quite there. I'm terrible at these type of prepared speeches, so I'm much better at answering questions if you do have them. I'm so sorry.
Oh, this was great. This was excellent. Yeah, I think the one more thing before we listen to your piece, I think you kind of touched on this, but what was like the prevailing thought, or what was the yes, whatever. She was great. Yeah, exactly. If you could take away one thing from these women, what was the thing you walked away with most?
Be strong, be humble, and continue to work for those around you. The idea that this was the two women, especially in the fields that they were in, neither are a Fortune 500 company. They're both companies that are there to make things easier for the community, to make sure that we are lifting up the other that we would think about, living in service of other people. It's just that you could see that radiate through the women that I interviewed.
Nice. That's awesome.
Interesting.
And
All
I
right.
think we have, it's like the last bit of yes, I think, from what I cued you on. Tom.
Yes. So yes. That's exactly what it is. Actually, should have been yes. Yes is what it should have been, Heidi. All right, let's enjoy the last little bit of yes. Oh my god. Yeah. This is awesome. Thanks so much for that, Heidi. That's beautiful. Actually, this was a fun party. We'll start wrapping up now, but hearing all of this brings back so many great memories for me. I hope other people too. And I think this album has a lot of meaning to a lot of us in a lot of different ways. Definitely for me, as I mentioned. Yeah, do we have any parting thoughts other than before we just kind of plug one more time that the CDs for sale / digital downloads? Brandy, Leanne, any thoughts? Anybody out there? Any of our friends? I muted everybody just to make sure we didn't have crazy things. Oh, there's a cat. Kurt brought his cat. Very good. Here, we've unmuted. There we go. All right. Well, so as we said, you can head to bbexperience.org to find digital downloads, which you can get tonight, which would be great. You can also put in for a physical CD. which will come in a few weeks, hopefully, based off of kind of coronavirus issues. Also, within hopefully the next 24 hours, it'll be available for purchase on iTunes, Amazon. It'll be on Spotify and some of these other things as well, so you can listen to it as there. Were a few other brief announcements. If you're wondering what's going to happen next with, what Brandy, go.
So I want to say actually a big thank you to Thomas for putting all the slides and the B-roll and all of that stuff together for tonight, as he's been doing for all of our online events. So thank you, Thomas. It always looks fabulous, and tonight was no exception.
Oh, good. Thanks. I appreciate it. What was to say? So if everybody's wondering what's going on with Chicago Stories, well, of course, we're taking a little bit of a break with coronavirus. We had plans to release Chicago Stories, the Oratorio Part 1, because we are doing a full oratorio for Chicago Stories this year. But of course, that's kind of taken a bit of a hiatus for obvious reasons. We're hoping to have the first part out next year. That first part will be based on the Chicago Fire, which is really exciting. And is the first part is being written by Eric Malmquist. So looking forward to that and other Chicago stories in the future. But for now, we get to celebrate this recording. Any parting thoughts before we end the broadcast and I go have a late dinner?
It was great. Thanks so much for doing
Thank
this.
you all.
It was fabulous to hear all these songs again.
Wonderful.
Thank you to the BBE team for staying the course on this project and seeing it through to the end. And
thank you very much.
Great recording, and everything that you're doing here is really great. Thank you.
Great. Well, we can't wait to have you all back, and we'll celebrate in live person whenever we can. And with that, this is the end of the BBE Live special edition for Chicago Stories album release. Everybody stay safe and have a good night. And we'll take it out with a little fun.
Nottingham Vale, would Nottingham Vale, no liquor on earth is like Nottingham Vale. Nottingham Vale, would Nottingham Vale, no liquor on earth is like Nottingham Vale. Nottingham Vale, boys, Nottingham Vale, no liquor on earth is like Nottingham Vale. Nottingham Vale, boys, Nottingham Vale, no liquor on earth is like Nottingham Vale.